From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to the show. So, if you were watching last week, you saw Sarah Karp sitting right here and running down some numbers that she and her colleagues at Catalyst had just crunched about how expulsions and suspensions were up in the CPS schools. But the big question was, what are the numbers in the charters? That's what we were talking about last week. Well, this week we heard those numbers for the first time, and they're pretty dramatic. In some cases, expulsions are 10 times as high as the traditional public schools. And the Sun-Times is reporting today that of the 25 schools with the top expulsion rates last year, 22 of them were charters. And the mayor said that he'd like to persuade the charters to use some of the models the traditional schools have developed to kind of reduce expulsions, because the CPS schools are accomplishing a lot of ways of, some promising ways of ending or at least reducing the expulsion rate. So, does anybody remember when charters were introduced as laboratories that could be used to teach best practices to the public schools? Well, here in Chicago, we like to be innovators, so we've introduced having the charters learn from the better managed traditional schools. Isn't that something? Well, anyway, we're speaking of innovation today on the show, and there was big news about Goose Island this week, the plant that was once home to the infamous Republic Windows plant. Remember that, where the workers struck in 2008 after the owners tried to fire them and lock them out, and no less than Barack Obama showed up to express his support. Well, that building is now going to be the home to a massive new tech innovation hub, kickstarted by about $70 million from President Obama's Defense Department. So, could Goose Island become the new Silicon Valley? Will CNBC and Fox Business Channel start saying, let's find out how that's playing on Goose Island? I don't know, it's something to think about. Well, the Tribune business columnist Melissa Harris has been covering this story and a lot of other stories for a long time and knows a lot about this, and I'm just really glad to have you on the show today, Melissa. Thanks for being here. And also, we got Chip Mitchell back with us again, our intrepid West Side reporter from WBEZ, from the West Side Bureau. And Chip has been covering a lot of other things that we want to talk about. So this week we got a kind of a polyglot show because we got so much to talk about with the Mexican cartel connection in Chicago. You've got this thing about this metal shredding operation going on the West Side, or I should say in Pilsen. And I don't know what else we have to talk about, but I really would like to start, if you don't mind, with the tech hub on Goose Island, because Melissa, I got to tell you, I've kind of been covering and part of news in Chicago for a real long time, and I have seen so many press releases with big tents set up and marching bands, and this is going to be the thing that makes us California. This is finally, it's going to happen, and that's been going on for 10 years, and some of them have succeeded, most of them have not. And it's really kind of hard to get a sense, really, of what the tech world is in Chicago. It's growing, definitely, in some ways. So the question I wanted to ask you is this a big deal? Is this news, this thing?
I believe it is.
Yeah?
I think the hope is that this will be a catalyst in the way that 1871 has been for startups. 1871 is a co-working space in the Merchandise Mart. Mm-hmm. It similarly has a large private sector component, which is critical to the success. And it also has a key function. It has a convening function. It brings people and scientists and businesses and universities together who previously have never worked together before, and in fact, in some cases, do not have a presence in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But still, it's early. We just won the grant this week. So I also share your slight hesitation.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's see if we can start at the beginning. What the heck is this thing?
Right.
I mean, I have read, I think, almost everything that's been written about it, and I still, at the end, say, this stuff has a sort of a mumbo-jumbo-y thing about it. It always does, like tech innovation, and then the next sentence is all jargon that,
Okay. As a spouse of a Defense Department contractor,
let
me tell you that that everything the Department of Defense does involves jargon. So you are just going to have to deal with that, because that is not going to change.
Right.
But the
startup innovative nanotechnology level.
But that's important, though, is the key customer here is the Department of Defense.
That is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this has not been, DOD has not been a strength of the Chicago economy. It has been a strength of the coast in California and the DC, Virginia, Maryland area. Yeah. So this has the potential to jumpstart this region as an actual recipient of DOD dollars in addition to the $70 million that's going to be invested here. But, you know, some of these projects might actually be classified. We actually might not know about them. And in fact, the bid itself falls under the Defense Department's sourcing authority and is not subject to FOIA, we're being told right now. So that's part of the reason that we don't have all the details. But what it will do is it will seek to help the DOD get materials faster and cheaper. That is the ultimate goal. And a lot of that is going to be achieved through in the virtual world, on a computer screen versus in a factory. That is the goal.
But the other goal, see, that's the part that I'm not understanding, because what everything I'm reading about says that ultimately its job is to actually make real stuff. I mean, real, tangible things.
This is about the design process that happens before the making. This is about the process, the iteration, the testing, et cetera, before the actual production line goes into place.
Can you give me even a wild-ass example of what that might be? I mean, like, what kind of product would it be? What might they innovate?
Lighter weight armor.
Okay, all right.
Quicker, faster robots that are used to defuse IEDs. These are just a handful of potential examples that the Defense Department is working on nationally. They're working on improved communications. They're working on jamming enemy communication signals. They are working on there's this amazing prototype I've seen of and I do not know, as I said, we don't have the bid, but DARPA, the Defense Department's kind of research arm, has been working on basically a
father of the internet.
Right, exactly, almost a mechanical mule that can carry goods. That's a horse without a heartbeat that can carry goods in deserts to reach far-flung resources. The Defense Department, as you pointed out, as a key part of the invention of the internet, is one of the most innovative, believe it or not, aspects of our economy.
Yeah. I mean, this is almost beginning to sound like a cheesy science fiction movie or something. It's like the wars of the future when it's just thousands of droney sort of...
Well, let me tell you as a counter of what doesn't matter, right? Those pomp and circumstance examples that you were talking about. What doesn't matter is when motorable mobility moves from the suburbs to downtown, okay? That's a real example of what you're talking about. And by the way, you know, there's the pomp and circumstance, but they're cutting thousands of workers in the process, okay? That is example of the stuff that makes you cynical, right? This is new, this is actual new money and actual new companies like Dow Chemical and Rolls-Royce, which do not have existing presences here in Chicago.
We have from time to time kidded our beloved mayor on this program. I'll admit that's true. And one of the things that I've had so much fun with is the number of times that he's announced that United Airlines is moving into Willis Tower. I mean, how many times can you announce it? And that's the kind of stuff that really sort of makes me cynical about this. Is like, oh yeah, another announcement that this is going to be the future of tech for Chicago. And you know, can Chicago really?
Look,
does the world need Chicago to be a technical hub?
Chicago needs Chicago to be a technical hub. Yeah, but
that's not the question. Does the world need it? Doesn't the world already have tech hubs all over the place?
Right. Well, let me tell you, every kind of industry that we're looking at right now will one day be powered by technology. Let me give you an example. You know, a manicure, something that is the height of the service economy. There is a startup here that basically compiles all of the open appointments for all of the area nail salons, right? and you can now go online and they serve as a broker to find you an open spot at a nail salon near you. Now, painting my nails is the most untechnical thing in the world, but let me tell you what is going to become technical in every single industry, and that is the process of getting me from this studio to that nail hub. I'm going to use Uber to get there. I'm going to use an app to book the appointment, and I'm going to use an app to pay for it too. So we have to be on the forefront of that, or we're not going to be. We're not going to be. You know, we're not even going to be in the conversation with, you know, a Tokyo or a London.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There are so many aspects to this, but it certainly is true that we have in the past been on the cutting edge of innovation. I mean, for the last 75 years.
We invented the cell phone, and
absolutely.
And we we can chide the Motorola move from the suburbs, but they still employ between Motorola Mobility and Motorola Solutions, they still employ thousands of people here.
Yeah, and we have IIT, and we have the University of Chicago, and we have Northwestern, and we have all these massive labs, and we have giant corporations still that need innovation. God knows they need innovation.
It's the only way they're going to survive.
Yeah, so there is certainly need for it, and I guess this might be the first time on the program where we're saying maybe our administration, maybe the mayor's office, maybe they're right on this one. Maybe they've got this down. That the way to do this is if anybody's got a connection to the President of the United States, it's our guy. And he brought it in. He reeled in $70 million of federal money, of, as you say, Defense Department money, which is the gravy money.
and it's not here.
Right, and
we
it's not here.
We have plenty of transportation dollars here, but we don't have hardly any Defense Department dollars.
We were joking years ago about the CTA when the trains were falling off the tracks and things were just really in very dire shape, not any much worse than they are today, that what we really needed to do was install cruise missiles on the top of L cars, and then we'd have all the money we needed.
And now we might actually have a facility that's capable of doing that for you, or at least giving you the nice sketch and rendering of what this cruise ship, this cruise missile apparatus should look like. No, it is I think it's a rare opportunity. I agree that it does remain to be seen how much of an impact it will have on the surrounding area. And the key step in that will be where they're going to start to receive some project proposals in the coming months, and we're going to see what they actually are doing. The proposal had to have some examples in it. The bid had to have examples of what they wanted to do. So now let's see if they're actually going to be able to do it.
Well, I think that, you know, if our mayor has a strength, his strength is pulling people together and sitting them down and knocking heads and saying, I want this to happen, and making connections with people who have money.
He's been following this process since at least 2012, when the government created a prototype one of these institutes in Youngstown, Ohio. He is very close with Bruce Katz at the Brookings Institute, who has been one of the leading advisors to the Obama administration on how to do this. So he has been really at in the triangle from moment one, probably from the days when he was at the White House.
If I can just sort of switch gears here a little bit, there are these two very interesting stories in the news this week in Chicago. We've got this tech hub thing, and we've also got this I don't even know how to describe it, but the arrest of El Chapo Guzman, the big drug
Guzman Loera. He's considered to be the most powerful drug trafficker in the history of the world.
So, Chip, I ask you the same question I asked Melissa. Is this a big story for us, the fact that this guy who appears to have just massive connections into Chicago and could in fact be, if you read what a lot of our favorite journalists have been writing over the last year or two, that it's this Mexican connection, and you have done great work on this. You actually went to Mexico to kind of trace this, to trace the pipeline to Chicago, that a lot of what we're seeing in this just out of control violence in Chicago and the shootings and everything, a lot of it is related to this drug trade. So the question is, Does this mean anything? Is this a big story?
Well, it is a big story for Chicago. Jack Riley, the head of the regional DEA office here, special agent in charge, has been saying for a couple of years now that Chapo, El Chapo, it means it's a nickname, means shorty in Spanish. But this fellow Guzman controls 70 to 80% of the heroin and cocaine that reaches our market, our supply of heroin. And from here, it then fans out to other parts of the Midwest. So Chicago has been a key retail center for the Sinaloa cartel, Guzman's organization, and it's also a key distribution hub. So it is a big deal in that sense. But what you got to think about is this supply chain, and this is what I went down to Ciudad Juarez, the Mexican border city, and across the river Rio Grande from El Paso, Texas. This supply chain goes back decades and decades, almost a century.
Really, that far?
For most of the 20th century, the main product was heroin. Eventually, in the 70s and 80s, they inserted a lot of cocaine into this supply chain. The cartels have come and gone in the last few decades. The people who've dominated this supply chain have come and gone, but the drugs have kept flowing, and they've only increased. Purity is up for heroin, the drug that we especially look at. Purity is up. Seizures are up. Prices have remained near historic lows for years now. And there are not many people around with a straight face that will tell you that this is going to cause any interruption at all in the supply of either heroin or cocaine into the Chicago area.
Because I mean, I think there is a real debate in I don't know, philosophical circles about whether we should spend so much time and energy and money and resources and human life trying to take out this, you know, this star, this top guy. It seems like that's what we do. We take out the top guy. And it's not a perfect analogy, but there is such a connection to me with like Al-Qaeda. You know, it's like we just nailed the #2 guy in Al-Qaeda for the 11th time this year, the #2 guy, you know, or the #1 guy, whatever it is. It doesn't really, the business is there, the demand is there. Nothing that they've done has changed the amount of heroin that Chicago and the environs want. So,
well, the argument in favor of putting all these resources on the Mexican and the United States side into going after a guy like Guzman is that well, one, he's a fugitive. You know, he escaped from a Mexican prison. He's being held. You know, the legend is that he was in a laundry cart.
Yeah.
He has been involved in an organization that responsible for you know, untold numbers of homicides, killings, especially in Mexico.
Thousands and thousands.
Thousands and thousands. Yeah. He has, you know, subverted Mexican democracy. It's been believed for many years now that his cartel has made inroads at all levels of government and the security forces, even the Mexican army, and that this is why he's been able to expand his empire so well. He obviously got some help getting out of that prison.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And you know, so there's a good argument to go. You have to go after a guy like this, and of course, the drug trade has caused a lot of suffering here in the United States, as we've reported at WBEZ. There are reasons not to be putting all these resources into going after the capos. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year going into this drug war, and what's likely to come out of nailing the top guy right now is his #2 guy who's thought to control operations. His name is Ismael Zambada. He's an old guy, and it's not believed that he's going to be able to control the organization. And what we've seen a lot in history when the top guy of a cartel is either arrested or killed is it'll splinter into factions, and there could be a lot of violence between those splinters, and there could also be challenges from the outside. For example, where I was, the cartel that controlled it for several years before Chapo's folks came in, the Juarez cartel. The heads of that cartel are still at large, and they're still around. There are people who are now working for Chapo in Juarez and El Paso. They're still around. They switch sides. They could switch sides again. And there could be a lot of violence and a lot of violent jockeying, and we could see another upsurge in violence in different parts of Mexico.
Is it fair to say or to speculate that a lot of the violence that we've been seeing in Chicago in the last couple of years, the street corner violence, is tied to or is a result of the cartels?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say we saw we saw a lot of increase in violence after the Chicago Police Department took out a lot of the big gang leaders and gang control. The gangs splintered here, and they became less monolithic in their control, and it became more of a block by block thing. And violence increased for several years, and I think that was a factor. I would say, but Chapo's organization has always been more business-minded. The people who receive the cocaine and the heroin on the Chicago end are generally businessmen. They're not gangs. The gangs don't come in until another level or two down in the wholesale ladder. So they're known especially in Mexico as being less violent and more business oriented than, for example, the second biggest cartel, the Zetas.
One of the things I find so ironic about this is that we talk about Chicago as a historic innovator, and it's always been the crossroads of transportation and innovative transportation. And a guy like Chapo looks at this and says, wow, if I'm going to make inroads into the United States, that's the place where that's where I want my beachhead, because I can get anywhere from Chicago. Right?
Well, that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
And there are recordings of him speaking in exactly those terms. Chicago was attractive to the
He was impressed with Chicago.
Right. Yeah. It was attractive to him for the same reason that Chicago worked for Montgomery Ward, for Sears, for the Pullman Company. That we have all this transportation infrastructure, and it's a hub of the Midwest.
Okay, well, there's a third story that I think kind of crosses into both of your realms, which is interesting since they seem to be so different from one another. But there was this strike last week at UIC, which we talked about on the show last week, about what that might mean. And it ties very closely into the raging pension argument that's going on in Chicago right now. And Melissa, you have written about the guys who are sort of lining up on the legal side to fight this. So I thought maybe we'd try to just throw the last part of the show out here and just kind of see if we can tie any of this together, since that's what that seems to be the theme of the show today, is this meaningful and can we tie it together? But the big thing we're seeing today, in fact, just today, we're seeing that CPS and CTU, they're talking about sitting down again and talking about pensions. Now, I can't even imagine what Barbara Byrd Bennett and the CTU have to say to one another at this point. But maybe they're trying to head off this legal battle, because it's going to be a bloodbath one way or the other, isn't it?
That's correct. First, the Illinois Supreme Court must decide which court is going to start with the case. But all of that is basically pomp and circumstance, because they're going to be the ones that will ultimately decide whether these kind of cost of living reductions and increases of the retirement age for state workers are going to be constitutional. It will be in their court. And if they decide that these changes are unconstitutional, then I don't see any alternative other than that the legislature will have to try to go back to work and get a constitutional amendment.
They'd have to go for a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, they'd have to change.
They wouldn't think about raising taxes or finding new revenues or anything. They'd just fight the constitutional argument again.
I think that at least the people I cover, remember I'm a business columnist.
Yes, I know, that's right.
There would, the outrage, it would be, my guess is that they will try the legislative remedy first.
Yeah. Because, I think there is, this is a probably the number one conversation we have here is we have a lot of people on the show who you know are pro-teacher and feel that the teachers are getting really screwed on this pension deal, but I always like to point out that the other 7/8 of Illinois probably doesn't really feel that way, and you get this very common thing about, wait a minute, you know, I lost my 401k, buddy, you know, or they shoved me into one and I've got $20,000 left, and I'm supposed to pay more taxes so you can get a 3% COLA. Oh yeah, where do I sign? So I mean, this is the thing that the teachers are up against, which of course brings us to UIC and the UIC strike that you were covering. I mean, it seems to me that the objective here is to start really making very public the complaints of a number of public service unions, whether it's, now we're bringing college professors into the matter, and they've got a real case to make, but so do the police, so do the fire, so do the librarians, so do the sanitation workers. So what happens if all of these guys all sit around the same table one day and just say, okay, we're all in on this together? Does that mean, the third time we ask the question, is it real? Does it mean anything?
Well, at a small level, that's already happening. I mean, speaking about the University of Illinois at Chicago faculty, they had a 2-day strike last week. They're trying to get their first contract after organizing a couple years ago. What's really remarkable there is that the majority of that union, they're people in the tenure system, or they either already have tenure or they're in line to get tenure, and they're standing up for a minority in the union that is making a lot less money. We're talking about $30,000 a year for people with PhDs who are teaching full-time and who are trying to maybe get their first book published. They're doing research. And so these people who are you know, tenure track faculty who are paid pretty well, or people that maybe are on the west side of campus that they're in a clinical position and they're pretty happy with the way things are going. They organize and they're standing up right now for these very low paid faculty members, which get, you know, many of whom get paid about half the amount even though than a CTU teacher, for example, or a cop.
Right.
So the teachers as well, they had a big shift in their union to the left in favor of an organizing strategy, and there's a lot of solidarity there, and they want a lot of a surprising amount, I would say, most people would say a surprising amount of sympathy during their strike from the community. So I don't know how this will shake out. I haven't heard about these forces getting together at all. There, you know, there's a big difference between the left-wing led, you know, teachers union and the Fraternal Order of Police, for example. I don't know.
But they do have something in common.
Well, on this state pension battle, the reason we only have 4 cases instead of 40 is that the largest state employee unions have banded together to form the We Are One coalition, which is represented by the law firm Freeboard and Peters. So they are, but I don't know how much of that is a result of just, you know, kind of a like-mindedness or a desire to conserve resources, right?
You know, guys, we just have to break it off. I'm so sorry. This is a fascinating conversation. I hope you'll just come back again. We'll carry it on another time, okay? Thank you so much for being here. Melissa from the Tribune, a business columnist. Melissa Harris making her first appearance on the show, and I hope it's not her last. And, of course, Chip Mitchell from WBEZ. So glad to have you back again, Chip. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can watch us all the time. But if you really want to show it when you want to see it, just go right here to this address. You can watch us on YouTube. And you can check us out on iTunes. You can subscribe, and you can listen to us any old time you want, and I hope you will. And we will come back again next week and try to do something else. We'll talk about something else, whatever it is. All right, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching. It's Chicago Newsroom. Bye.